back down and shut your trap. It's time for
Keeping It Sports with M3.
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
Well, I'll need some beer.
Are you ready?
You have to ask me nicely.
Come on now, don't be bashful.
Are you ready? Are you ready for
Place for the best sports talk and news surrounding each league.
I can prove it with my usual flawless logic.
Hey, man, this time we're going to do it my way.
What's your name again?
And now, here's your host, M3, Mike Rosansky. Coming to you from Freehold, New Jersey. It's time for Keeping It Sports with M3, normally powered by the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. Good evening, everyone. Hope everything's going well for you here on this Tuesday, the 21st day of January. I am, of course, Mike M3 Rosansky. Thanks to Mother Nature playing some tricks on us the last couple of days, as well as the holiday on Monday, doing the podcast today, which actually works out better because I'll get to talk about the College Football National Championship game coming up a little bit later on in the podcast, as well as give you some thoughts on some of the things going on in baseball right now, as we are just about a month away from pitchers and catchers reporting, and one team out there decided to give their fan base another Christmas during this off season. Some movement as far as the NFL coaching front that we'll discuss. So there's a lot that I want to get to over this next hour here, but of course have to start with the NFL playoffs over the weekend that have now set up two rematches in the championship games taking place this Sunday. And we'll start on the AFC side of things, because I think the AFC side of things, if you're someone like me who doesn't have a dog in the fight, who doesn't have a team in the mix here, this is the side where you hear the most aggravation. This is the side that you hear the most noise. This is the side you hear the most rumblings from the NFL fan base, something that the NFL needs to be greatly concerned about. Because the perception out there is that the Kansas City Chiefs are the golden child of the NFL. The perception out there is that they are heavily protected, that they have the league on their side, they have the officials on their side, and you're getting to a point here now where the fans don't believe the outcomes of their games are real, where the fans feel that these games are being in some way fixed. And you can't have that perception becoming a reality, especially when you have a bad vibe going into the game by a lot of fans. They look at the officiating crew and they see Clay Martin as the lead official for this game, seeing his history with the Kansas City Chiefs in recent vintage, being 6-0 with him as the lead official during the Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid era. And then when you get into the game and you have two bogus BS calls that, quite frankly, added early momentum for the Chiefs, seemed to hand them a great start to the game, you already had people fuming. You already had people annoyed. And that's something that you have to address, something that you have to nip right in the butt, because you can't have this continue to be a thing. You can't have this be something where the fans are going to turn away or be turned away by your product because of awful officiating always coming at the favor of one team. And I understand these officials have it hard as it is. But when you see it come at moments like the second drive of the game for the Kansas City Chiefs, where it looks like the Texans have taken the Chiefs' offense off the field. It looks like the Texans are going to start to get a little bit of momentum here. And Will Anderson gets called for what looked like, and even Joe Buck and Troy Aikman were calling, a bogus roughing the passer penalty, in which they're saying that he made contact with Mahomes' helmet, that it was a helmet-to-helmet situation. When you watch the replay, you're seeing he's making contact with his chest. You're the Texans, you're almost playing against two teams. You're playing against the Kansas City offense and the officiating. You already have it tough enough being the road underdog, but then when you've got things like this call going against you. And then later in the game, when Mahomes is pulling some of his, what they call Mahomes magic, which I more so view as Mahomes nonsense, where he runs around a little bit and at the very last second decides to slide when he sees the two defenders coming at him. If you're Fatukasi and you're Tutu, you're looking at what chance do we have, because they made contact with each other on that play. They didn't make any contact with Mahomes while he was in mid-slide. They didn't do anything outrageous against them. And that extended the drive, allowing Kansas City to take a full touchdown lead there. Those are things you have to nip in the bud. You can't have Clay Martin continue to referee games for the Chiefs, and you can't continue to have it where it seems like the officials are carrying the Chiefs' bag at some times. And that's not to take away from anything about how great Andy Reid is. He's one of the winningest coaches in NFL history. He just hit his 300th career win. Very few coaches have ever pulled that off. That's not to take away or diminish anything from Patrick Mahomes or Travis Kelce or Chris Jones, who was playing his first game in almost a month. But you've got to have it so that your viewers, your fans, are at least believing there's a chance that both teams out there on the field have the same fair opportunity. But let's be honest here. The officials are not the only reason why the Texans lost to the Chiefs over the weekend. Take into account the fact they couldn't protect C.J. Stroud to save their lives. And you look, George Karlaftis was pinning his ears back in the second half and having a track mate running down Stroud and beating him up in that fourth quarter especially. And then we view it as such a minute thing. We view it as such a, not a big deal thing. But ladies and gentlemen, kickers are people too. Special teams is an important part of the game. And we only realize that when it comes back to bite our team in the rear end. When it comes back and is totally costly toward our team or a team that we're rooting against. And the special teams for the Texans was god-awful in Saturday's game. They allowed a 63-yard kick return on the opening kickoff that gave the Chiefs great field position to start off their first drive. Now you credit the Texans' defense for holding it to just a field goal, but this was never a game in which the Texans were getting blown out, where the Texans were outside of shouting distance. They kept it, for the most part, within a one-score game throughout the contest. The problem was their special teams let them down with allowing the early kickoff return, and then the fact that Kai Fairbath killed any momentum they seem to have, because they come out of the locker room and have this long 15-play drive take up a large chunk of that third quarter, kept Mahomes and company on the sidelines for essentially 45 minutes of real time in between offensive plays for them. And for Fairbairn, on what looked like it was going to be the game-tying touchdown from Joe Mixon, he comes out there and misses the extra point. He had an awful day kicking-wise between that and his missed field goal at the end of the game, which I'm not saying this from a gambler's perspective because I don't gamble on games, but at least there, he makes the field goal, you get it within an 8-point game, and if you can pull off the impossible, you can pull off the miracle of getting the onside kick, you at least give yourself a shot in the final couple of minutes. But everything between the officials, bad special teams, and the lack of protection for CJ Stroud worked against the Houston Texans on Saturday, and now has us in another very familiar place with the Kansas City Chiefs hosting an AFC title game where they're now going to see a very familiar opponent. An opponent that probably has somewhat nightmares, or at least their fans have nightmares going against the Kansas City Chiefs, that being the Buffalo Bills. As during the Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen era here in the NFL, the Chiefs are 3-0 against this vintage of the Buffalo Bills. And that's not to take anything away from Josh Allen's greatness. He's been phenomenal in some of these games. But you've had situations such as Tyler Bass missing a game-tying field goal in Buffalo last year, and then probably the most famous of them all just a couple of years ago when Buffalo looked like they had the game on lockdown with 13 seconds to go. Mahomes hits Kelsey right across the middle of the field twice to get them in field goal position, tie the game, and they win it in overtime. Buffalo has the opportunity to finally overcome that hurdle, finally get that chance, because what you've seen this year is a more mature Josh Allen. We continue each and every single year to watch growth in this guy's development, where it's not he's just a gunslinger. He's not just going out there trying to make the home run pass every single time. I think the best thing that's actually happened for him was them trading away Stephon Diggs this past offseason, because it's allowed him to not feel his attention should be in one direction, to not feel that he's got to please one weapon, to not feel that he's got to just suffice the happiness of one player. He could spread it around, look for the open player, look for the correct play to make, and if it comes to it that he's got to take off and run with the football, he'll do that. He's an all-around, immensely great talent. The only thing that he has not done is overcome Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the playoffs and got into a Super Bowl. And that's something that's going to continue to hang over him until he gets the job done. And even in pulling off victory against the Ravens on Sunday night, he doesn't come out of that game as the main story, as the lead of everyone's focus, where we should all be focusing on what a gritty, gutty performance it was by this Bills team. More so, our attention is focused on another postseason failure by Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. Because we want to rip Josh Allen for his shortcomings in the postseason. I'd make the argument Lamar Jackson's shortcomings in the postseason have been even worse. When you consider he's 3-5 in the playoffs, in 6 years he's made one AFC Championship game. He's lost in the division round 3 times, lost in the wild card round twice. And this is a guy that, through his first 6 years, has won 2 MVPs, could win a 3rd MVP, and was extremely turnover prone on Sunday night. I'm still not sure who he was aiming for on the interception in the first quarter. I'm not sure if Likely read the play wrong, or if Jackson thought that Likely was supposed to go deep, or if it was just a situation where there was too much pressure up in his face and he decided to chuck one up when he got picked off late in the first quarter by Rapp. Then he gets sacked by Damar Hamlin in the second quarter, fumbles. Bills get great field position and are able to take the lead there, go up by a touchdown. Because remember, these two teams had traded touchdowns on their initial extended drives, and it looked like we were in for a shootout here. But the Ravens continuously shot themselves in the foot with some of these turnovers. But none were as bad as the Mark Andrews fumble. Because the Mark Andrews fumble came at a time where it looked like the Ravens offense was starting to cook a little bit, was starting to get on a bit of a heater. They were running the ball at will against the Bills, and seemed to have the Bills offense calm down a little bit. But Andrews fumbles right in the middle, right to Bernard, and it gave the Bills their really last scoring opportunity, gave them a chance to go up by 8. But between that fumble and then Mark Andrews dropping the 2-point conversion late in that game that would have tied it, possibly sent to overtime, he had to have felt like the loneliest person in Orchard Park on Sunday night. And this is not something new for Mark Andrews. As good a player as he is, he has been very quiet over the course of his postseason career. He and I have the same number of touchdowns in 8 playoff games for the Baltimore Ravens, and I've never stepped foot on the field for him. Hell, he has more fumbles than he has touchdowns, and he has 8 drops in 8 postseason games. This, for the Ravens, has to be an immense failure, has to be an excruciating loss, because you led the league in both passing offense and rushing offense this year. And even though Lamar Jackson is still going to be in his prime when we head into next year, remember, next season, Derrick Henry is going to start the year at 32 years old. At some point, Father Time is going to catch up to him, just like it catches up to everyone else. I don't care how great he eats, how regiment he is with his workouts. At some point, he's going to slow down just like every other great running back. And the fact that you didn't get this done this year, when you probably presented the offense that had the best chance of overcoming the Kansas City Chiefs, has got to feel like a waste, has got to feel like even more of an excruciating failure than last year's AFC Championship game loss at home to that Kansas City Chief team. And that is something that Lamar Jackson is going to have hanging over his head for another off season, that he missed out on an opportunity to steal the glory from Patrick Mahomes, missed out on the opportunity to overcome that demon that overhangs his head and overhangs Josh Allen's head. But Josh Allen now is at least going to have the chance to overcome that this Sunday night. I got plenty left to get to throughout this podcast. Like I said, give you some thoughts on the NFC side of things from divisional round weekend, mixing some baseball with the unfortunate passing of a baseball legend last week, give you a thought or two on the college football national championship game from last night. So plenty to get to throughout the next about 40 minutes or so here. Glad you guys could join me on this Tuesday night. And like I tell you each and every single week, please sit back, relax, hell, put your feet up if you feel like it, and continue keeping the sports with M3.
I'll be back.
There is probably no team in the NFL, and I should be more specific in saying no team amongst the 4 teams that won over the weekend that is getting criticized more over the last couple of days than the Philadelphia Eagles. As Herm Edwards once said, you play to win the game. The objective is to win the football game. It's not always going to be pretty. It's not always going to be a work of art, not going to be something that you want going to Canton, Ohio. But as long as you come away with victory and do it in the least taxing manner, the least manner of injury-wise, health-wise, that's what's important. I think it's fair to bring up that if we did not have these insane wintry conditions on Sunday, if we did not have nearly half a foot of snow dumping on the city of brotherly love, we might be sitting here talking about the Eagles season being over and the Los Angeles Rams preparing for the NFC Championship game coming up this weekend, because it's not as if the Rams got mowed over by the Eagles like some predicted. It's not as if the adrenaline high of the Rams winning a neutral site playoff game after all of the chaos that has gone on in Los Angeles over the last couple of weeks with those wildfires and destroying large chunks of their developments, destroying people's homes and leaving people close to them homeless. It's not as if that just completely wore off and they went into Philadelphia and got their doors blown off. The Rams came to play on Sunday. The Rams came out there as a team that put up a great fight against the Philadelphia Eagles. But they made some crucial turnovers in the fourth quarter, including back-to-back drives in which Kyren Williams and Matthew Stafford fumbled after they got the safety by Gilmore, sacking Hurts in the end zone, pulling it with a 1-point game. You're thinking there's a chance here for the Rams as long as they are safe with the football. They hadn't fumbled the football, at least Kyren Williams hadn't fumbled the football since the last time these two teams met earlier this year. But that killed some of their momentum, allowed the Eagles to take a little bit of a deep breath, and allowed a chance for them to get a couple of home run shots in. And their home run shots were mostly with their ground attack. As once again, what we're talking about with this Philly offense, they seem to not be able to throw the football. In 5 of their last 6 games, they have averaged under 200 yards passing. The one time that they did was the week before Jalen Hurts went down with the concussion back in early December. Other than that, they've been winning these games with Barkley dominating on the ground and their defense doing just enough to shut down the competition. And Saquon Barkley, it wasn't like he had this immense game where he had a 15-yard carry here, a 20-yard carry here, another 5 to 10 here or there. He had 2 carries in this game, 2 home run carries that led the way for the Philadelphia Eagles offense. One in the first quarter and then one in the fourth quarter. Between that time, the Rams were able to slow him down, were able to keep him calm enough and force the Eagles to just constantly kick field goals against them. And it took a nail biter at the end. It took this Eagles defense slamming the door on that final drive for the Rams to be sent packing, because they got the ball back right after that 70-plus yard run by Barkley and went right down the field and scored before you could blink. You're looking after that touchdown and thinking, oh, it's game over. This is the lockdown here. But the Rams showed no quit. The Rams continued to fight, continued to claw back in this game. But I think if you're looking for an MVP from this game, it's not Jake Elliott. It's not Saquon Barkley. It's not Jalen Hurts, certainly. It's Jalen Carter. Because Jalen Carter at times was an unstoppable force. At times was just a game wrecker. He created the fumble by Kyren Williams early in the fourth quarter. And on the final 2 plays of this game, he made life hell for Matthew Stafford and locked the game down for the Philadelphia Eagles, including a sack and getting right in Stafford's face, forcing that overthrow to Puka Nacua, allowing the Eagles to survive and advance. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world, like I said, but they advance. But now they're going to have to throw the football. They're going to have to do something more than just run the ball, because they're going up against the Commanders for the 3rd time this year. Did not think before this postseason began that we would be seeing an Eagles-Commanders Part 3 in the NFC Championship game. But that's where we sit now, because you have a gritty, gutty Commanders team with a rookie quarterback, a new head coach, a new general manager, a new vibe down there in our nation's capital, at least from a football sense of things, where they believe for the first time in 30 years that something special is going on as they advance to their first NFC Championship game since 1991 with their victory against the Lions on Saturday night. You got to believe that all week long, they're going to be game planning, put that extra man in the box, and force someone other than Saquon Barkley to beat them. Force something other than the ground game of the Philadelphia Eagles to beat them. Say that, hey, Eagles, just like everyone else, we've seen that you have not thrown the football much in the last month and a half. You're going to have to win through the air against us, not with Saquon Barkley going nuts. And with the Commanders winning, it ended what was probably team-wise my favorite story of the NFL season. The Detroit Lions, the 15-2 Detroit Lions, led by Dan Campbell and Jared Goff, their season came to a resounding thud on Saturday night. Yes, they had so many injuries on defense, had nearly an entire starting lineup and practice squad face time on the injured reserve at times during this season with how many guys they lost, led by Aiden Hutchinson. But that's not the reason why they lost this game. They lost the game. Yes, their defense could not slow down Jaden Daniels and company, especially in that second quarter where the Commanders scored a resounding 4 touchdowns on them and were going to the house seemingly on every drive. But the Lions were too mistake prone, were too turnover prone. And we saw them win a game earlier this year in which Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions. That's not the norm. That is not something that typically happens. More times than not, when you turn the football over 5 times in a game, not only are you going to lose, you're going to come away looking like you got your ass kicked. And that's what happened here for this Lions team. They were just too reckless, too careless with the football, including when they tried to get cute early in the fourth quarter and Jamison Williams got picked off on that trick play intended for Jahmyr Gibbs. I understand that they were down by 10 at that time, but when you're having a wide receiver throw the football at that point in the game, after your quarterback has made some really bad turnovers, put you in some really bad spots throughout the game, eventually all of this cuteness that they were able to coast through the season with, eventually at some point it came back to bite you. And now you sit here, if you're a Lions fan, like sitting there on Saturday night, I've mentioned this guy plenty of times throughout the year on this podcast. My buddy Billy August, he and I have been friends since we were freshmen in high school. He's a diehard, passionate Detroit Lion fan. He was on my mind throughout Saturday night. I could only imagine how heartbroken and miserable he was off of that loss, because if you're a Lion fan, you've never experienced this before. Yeah, you made the playoffs last year, but you never experienced where you were the team everyone was chasing. You were the team that got the first round bye, had the best record in the sport. And now changes are coming there in Detroit. You've already lost Ben Johnson in the last couple of days. He's going to go to the Chicago Bears to be their new head coach. In all likelihood, in the next couple of days, you could be losing Aaron Glenn to go become the head coach of my New York Jets. And as we know, every year there's turnover on a roster. You're not going to have the same 53 guys on your team as you had this past year. There's going to be guys that are due for paydays. Hell, you might not have this Sonic and Knuckles thing that you've been so prideful in Jahmyr Gibbs and Montgomery as a dominant running back tandem going into next year. So if you're a Lion fan, you got to feel today even more heartbroken and just feeling like you failed than even the Raven fans did, because even though Lamar Jackson has some things he's got to overcome in his career, at least the Ravens fan base has seen their team win a championship. This was something all new for Lion fans these last couple of years. And while I'm not saying they're going to disappear and fade away and be a one-hit wonder as far as being a contender, the more years that pass of you not doing it, it starts to fade away the dream. I say this all the time. Tomorrow sometimes does not come. You can't just look at it and say, oh, we'll get him next year. We'll be right back at this spot. That situation may not happen. Remember last year, you got to the NFC Championship game. Now you've been eliminated one game earlier than you were last year. And look at the team that eliminated you last year, the San Francisco 49ers. They have been on the doorstep for so long, and then it all fell apart for them this year with age and injury, and now guys seeking new contracts. You can't always just expect that you're going to be right back there, because sometimes, in some cases, as we've seen in sports, tomorrow just does not happen.
I'll be back.
The biggest positive about doing this podcast on Tuesday this week rather than the normal Monday recordings is that I get to talk about the college football national championship. Would not have felt the same if I waited till next Monday to talk about the fact that Ohio State did it. Ohio State, despite a lot of doubt, a lot of trepidation by people on the outside, won their 7th national championship last night. They are now the team that won the first 4-team college football playoff national championship and the team that won the first 12-team college football national championship playoff format. And early on, it looked like it was going to be a slugfest. It looked like it was going to be a back-and-forth battle because Notre Dame ran the ball right down their throat on the first drive, having an 18-play drive to start this game. Such an exhausting drive for Notre Dame that I think took the wind out of their sails for a little bit, especially when you're seeing Riley Leonard on the sidelines vomiting after the drive. Now, some of that could have been that he landed on the football diving into the end zone on his opening drive touchdown. But then you started to see the difference in talent. You started to see why the Ohio State Buckeyes were viewed as Goliath and Notre Dame was viewed as David. And Notre Dame, I don't want to take anything away from them. I don't want to take away the remarkable story that they were. The fact that Marcus Freeman was able, after they lost to Northern Illinois earlier this year at home, when everyone was counting them out, including yours truly, everyone on the outside thought that they were going to be done as far as their chances of making the college football playoff. And for them to overcome that, not have another loss during the regular season, win 3 games in this playoff, and get to the national championship game, considering in some those games they did not have as many great recruits as their opposition, deserves our respect, deserves to be credited. Was actually a time where you looked at Notre Dame and you said, you know, I don't hate Notre Dame. Normally they come across as very snobby and obnoxious, but this was a very likable Fighting Irish team. But they ran into a Buckeye team that just has more talent than them, that has so many 5-star recruits, was able to work the transfer portal in a remarkable way, including getting their quarterback in Will Howard, getting a running back in Quinshawn Judkins, and both of them had immense impacts in not just this game, but this road to getting to the national championship. After that opening drive, Ohio State seemed to hit some kind of light switch, seemed to get on this crusade against Notre Dame, in which they really never looked back. I know that Notre Dame started to put up a fight there in the fourth quarter, even got it within a one-score game. But it seemed like at any point, Ohio State could just snap their fingers and do whatever they wanted offensively. And Will Howard started the game off with 13 consecutive completions on his throws. Junkins had some amazing long drives. And when you needed him the most, Jeremiah Smith, even though he was quiet for most of this game, had the game icing catch that put them in a position to slam the door and end Notre Dame's hopes and Notre Dame's chances. It's a heartbreaker if you're a Notre Dame fan, but you just ran up against a better team. It's plain and simple. There's no breakdown. There's no scientific facts about it. There's nothing about it where you say this could have gone different, that could have gone different. Ohio State was just the better overall team. And a lot of us got into the trap, fell into the trap, should I say, of counting them out after that loss to Michigan. A lot of us started to question Ryan Day's job security. Hell, I came on this podcast 2 days after that loss to Michigan and thought that Ryan Day's job was in jeopardy, that he had to win the national championship or at the very least get to the national championship final to remain the head coach with the Buckeyes, considering he had never beaten Michigan. He had not won a Big Ten championship. And despite all of that outside noise, despite all of the internal pressure from boosters, from the alumni, from that fan base, Ohio State just wiped all that pressure away, won their first championship in over a decade. And now Ryan Day is going to be the toast of the town out there in Columbus. They're going to be dotting the I with a smile on their face and not going to be talking about Ryan Day's job security anytime soon. Now, if you're a Notre Dame fan, while you have some work to do as far as this roster is concerned, you may lose Riley Leonard in the upcoming draft. Rest assured, you have a great coach on your hands in Marcus Freeman. And you can rest assured that he's going to be there next year, because the only head coaching opportunity that I think he would have really left for in the NFL is the Chicago Bears. And like we mentioned earlier, Ben Johnson got that gig yesterday. And I give the Bears some credit here, realizing that they needed to go with an offensive mastermind. And that's what Ben Johnson has been in his years in Detroit. They've been top of the league in almost every offensive category these last couple of years, whether it be red zone touchdown percentage, yards per game, offensive points per game, touchdown per drive. And Ben Johnson is a very innovative play caller, a very creative play caller. You need someone that is going to mold Caleb Williams and get the best out of him. And look at Jared Goff's numbers. The season before Ben Johnson took over as the Lions offensive coordinator, he had a 46 total QBR. That improved to a 63 in his first year as the offensive coordinator. And largely because they dropped Goff's sack percentage down 3% from 2021 to 2022. The Lions also ranked first in the league in play action this past season. The Bears were 30th. So you get a very creative mind in here. He's now bringing in some coaches on his coaching staff on the defensive side of things that have been head coaches in this league before, that are guys that he can turn to in the likes of especially Dennis Allen to help him overcome any rookie jitters there may be as a head coach. Yes, you're going to have to work on your offensive line a little bit because 3 of your starters are going to be hitting free agency, but you needed to hit a home run hire with your next head coach if you want to get the absolute best out of Caleb Williams. And at least on paper, as of right now, I think they've done that. And it finally happened, ladies and gentlemen, just right after I got done recording last week's podcast. It seemed like moments after it, I pressed the stop button last Monday. Jerry Jones came out with the press release announcing the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy were parting ways. I don't even know why they went this long kicking their feet through the mud. It was clear they were not bringing him back. I thought it was stupid that they did not let him talk with the Chicago Bears the week before. And they're so far back on the potential race to hire head coaching candidates. They could have talked to Ben Johnson last week. They could have talked to Aaron Glenn, could have talked to some of these great coordinators out there that teams were either on their bye week of the playoffs or going through the first interview cycle. And now, while everyone's 10 steps ahead of them, the Cowboys are looking around in the sky, waiting for rain here, hoping for a prayer to fall in their lap. And while they never truly hit the promised land with McCarthy, I don't think you can say that his 5 years there were a failure. He had them before this year in the playoffs every year. He had 3 consecutive 12-5 seasons. He had them right on the doorstep. It's just you have a roster that is full of talent, not full of guys that can come together as a group of men and be a true team. And finally, when the age of the offensive line caught up with you, injuries on both this defense and injuries to Dak Prescott happened this year. That's when the Cowboys started to fall apart. That's when the Cowboys started this trend of just being probably the worst home team in the NFL. Remember, up until late November, they were getting their doors blown off in every home game. They were the first team in NFL history to trail by at least 20 points in 6 consecutive home games, going back to their playoff last year against the Green Bay Packers. The big problem here, we know what the problem here is. It's not McCarthy's coaching. It's the man upstairs, Jerry Jones. The fact that he is judge, jury, and executioner of this franchise as the owner, general manager, and team president is a problem. And he seemingly takes no accountability for it. He just wants to have a best friends club there. He wants to have all of his players love him and always has to put his voice out there. And most of these teams you hear from the owner, once, maybe twice during the year? What other owner does a press conference after every game and then puts your head coach in the uncomfortable position every week to have to answer questions based on what the owner said either in his post-game press conference or on his weekly radio show? Mike McCarthy was able to withstand all of that, was able to overcome all of that and make things just about football, and was able to do so with not necessarily a team full of team guys, a team that was full of more of me guys, especially their pass rusher, Micah Parsons, who he could sit there and talk about how heartbroken all he wants about the firing, and that's really what this was a firing of Mike McCarthy. You let him whistle in the wind for a week before moving on from him and kind of did him dirty here. Now, he may not even get a crack in this coaching cycle here. You could talk about all you want, Micah Parsons, how heartbroken you are for Mike McCarthy. You guys sure didn't play it like that. And you sure didn't have an owner that ran this team concerned about protecting Mike McCarthy's longevity as your head coach. And I got to be honest with you. I don't care how big that star is on their field, on their helmet, the fact that they play in Dallas, Texas, where there's no state income tax. If you're a head coach of any respectability, why the hell would you want this job? Because you're always going to have an owner that's butting in, that's meddling, that's going to want to take credit here, want to make it more about himself rather than what's best for the brand, what's best for the team in trying to win. That's why I've been shaking my head about this connection to Deion Sanders all week long. I know he played there. He won a championship with them, but he seems more tied in with the college football lifestyle. He seems more tied in to want to just be a coach and be a big part in not just winning, but the growth and development of young men and be a leader to these men on and off the field. And he can't do that in Dallas. He can't do that with the Cowboys as long as Jerry Jones is running things. Even though Shadir's leaving, he's talked about how much he wants to coach Shiloh as well in college. He's probably better off staying there in Colorado, where they had a more respectable season this past year, even though they're going to be losing Shadir Sanders, going to be losing Travis Hunter. He has proven he can be a great recruiter, and he can work the transfer portal, and will have Colorado probably in a better place in college football this coming year than the Dallas Cowboys will be in the NFL in 2025. And if you're a Cowboy fan, that's a sad place to be in. That's a sad place to feel like right now, especially when you look up and you see the Commanders and the Eagles playing in the NFC Championship game and realize that now every team in the NFC, including a few expansion franchises, has played in the championship game since the Cowboys' last appearance in 1995.
I'll be back.
Now, as we've seen in the sports world the last couple of years, we're starting to see more and more, unfortunately, of our legendary figures that we've grown up with, that we've had almost be the soundtrack to our lives in the sports world pass on, go to a better place, should we say. And the most recent one of those legends was last Thursday when Milwaukee Brewers legendary announcer Bob Uecker passed away at the age of 90. And what's incredible about Bob Uecker is that every generation that has been alive and knew of the name Bob Uecker remembers him as something different. Now, if you're in Milwaukee, you'll always remember him as the voice of your team. And that is something that will never be taken away from you, especially with the fact that they have the Uke seats in the Brewers Stadium, where up there in the upper deck, there's the statue of Bob Uecker sitting there on the bench with his arm around the seat. something that will stand the test of time. But he was one of the many, many great voices of Major League Baseball. You look back over the decades and you're going to find some very remarkable voices, some voices that are on the Mount Rushmore of baseball announcing. And Bob Uecker is amongst those with some of his calls. But we don't just think about him as the baseball announcer. There's some that will think of him as the guy that was a baseball announcer in the movie Major League, as he played Harry Doyle for the up and down Cleveland franchise that somehow in both of those movies became a playoff contender. Or his role as George Owens during a 122 episode run of the series Mr. Belvedere. Or his role as a comedian on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. He became one of Johnny Carson's favorite guests. With that success off the field, remember, he was a pretty good player in his own right. I mean, at least you got to be a pretty good player to make the major leagues even for 5 minutes. He lasted 6 seasons in the big leagues, won a World Series title with the Cardinals in 1964. He just had a very remarkable baseball life and was one of those jolly figures that you come across every once in a while where no one had a bad thing to say about him. Everyone spoke of him so glowingly, and everyone will have a resounding memory of him, whether it be calling games for the Brewers, doing World Series games with Bob Costas and Joe Morgan in the 90s, his acting career, his comedian career with Johnny Carson. Just an absolutely remarkable, astounding life. And if you have the chance, even if you're not the biggest of baseball fans in the world, I advise you to go watch his Hall of Fame induction speech. He had the people dying for, about 15 to 20 minutes there. Even all of the Hall of Famers were falling all over themselves, cracking up. Just a remarkable man, a remarkable career, a remarkable life. And Bob Uecker, wherever you are up there in heaven, we love you. We miss you. God bless you. Rest in peace, Mr. Baseball. I've seen a lot of whining, complaining, annoyance across the social media world in the last couple of days, because there is one team that is dominating the conversation. One team that has seemingly become the new evil empire in Major League Baseball. That's right. It's no longer the New York Yankees that have that title. It's the Los Angeles Dodgers, as they have seemingly given their fan base a second Christmas. They have seemingly given their fan base a second chance to be happy this off season, as in the last 5 days, they have added the Japanese phenom Roku Sasaki. Sunday morning, they signed reliever Tanner Scott, and this morning, they added reliever Kirby Yates. Now, in the case of Sasaki, it comes across as very annoying for baseball fans because it feels like so many teams, so many fan bases were just taken for a victory lap before he finally decided to make his decision to join the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now, unlike in the cases of when they signed Shohei Ohtani or Yamamoto last year, they were not able to give him the big $300 million contract because he's under 25 years old, spent less than 6 seasons in Japan, and they had to essentially sign him to a major league deal and spend in the range of $5 to $6 million on the international signing bonus pool to bring him over here. It feels like all along that this was just a fait accompli, and teams like the Mets, Yankees, Toronto Blue Jays, San Diego Padres wasted their time prioritizing trying to make pitches for this guy to join their franchise. And this guy's a remarkable talent. Don't get me wrong. He's 23 years old, throws 100 miles an hour, has some nasty breaking stuff, including his splitter. But he comes over here with all of this fanfare after dominating in the Neopan Professional Baseball League the last couple of years. And while his team heavily protected him the last couple of seasons, I think what you could see is the Dodgers finally be that team that goes from your traditional 5-man rotation to a 6-man rotation, with him coming over here, adjusting to Major League pitching schedule. You've got Yamamoto, who missed time due to injury last year. Tyler Glasnow, who we know is always good to miss 6 or 7 starts over the course of any season. Shohei Ohtani has finally got to step back on a mound and be a two-way player at some point, whether it's at the very beginning of the year or later in April. But fans are just fed up and annoyed because they see everything the Dodgers have done here in the last year and a half. They got Ohtani and Yamamoto last year. During the season, they make a trade for Jack Flaherty. They essentially stole Teoscar Hernandez in free agency and were able to lock him up. They signed Blake Snell as a free agent, were able to re-sign Tommy Edman, and you're seeing them get all of these contracts on these deferral payments. Now, the one that in my mind comes across as the most annoying and goes against the spirit of the rules is the Ohtani contract. Because when they made this rule years ago about the deferral payment and said that the player's annual average salary had to remain at least $2 million, I don't think they made the rule thinking that there was going to be a guy that signed a 10-year, $700 million contract. That might be something we have to go back and revisit in the next CBA, because that is where fans come across a little bit annoyed. But it's not like the Dodgers are breaking any rules here. The problem is they have hedge fund guys that are running their team. They have guys that are starting these brokerage accounts, starting these fundings with all of these deferred contracts, where later on when they've got to pay these deals, they're not losing anything. The hell, they're barely even going to be pulling money out of their own pocket with what these accounts are going to be worth after these players' careers are all said and done. And when it's happening with a team that just won a World Series, is constantly getting all of these international players to join their team, and these smaller market fan bases up in arms, feeling like they don't even stand a chance, why even compete now? You could somewhat understand that. But in the last 25 years, since we've had the turn of the century here, let's look at a couple things. A, we have not had a repeat champion in the World Series since the 2000 New York Yankees. We've only had one time where the defending World Series champion even got back to the World Series the next year, that being the Philadelphia Phillies in 2009. And we've only had 6 times in the last 25 years in which the team with the highest payroll won the World Series. Now, the Dodgers are blowing everyone out of the water when it comes to payroll. They're going to go into next year with a payroll of $374 million, not counting any of the deferral money that they've got on the books here. And when you've added this kind of talent, coming off of a World Series championship, now you're going to have Ohtani pitching again. You still got Betts there, Freeman there, re-signing Teoscar Hernandez, have a lights-out bullpen that you just added Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates to. It's going to frustrate people. It's going to have people annoyed. Now, I don't want to hear any Yankee fans, Met fans, Red Sox fans, Chicago Cub fans, San Francisco Giant fans, any of the big market clubs have their fan bases up in arms, crying and complaining, saying that the Dodgers are doing anything unfair here. No, you shouldn't be pointing at the Dodgers. What you should be pointing at is your own ownership. Because they could be doing this same thing as far as deferred payments, as far as structuring these contracts where you're not paying the guys $35 million per year all at once. Where in the case of Tanner Scott, he got a 4-year, $72 million contract, and $21 million of it is going to be deferred till later on. Same thing applies in the Blake Snell contract and Tommy Edmonds contract. He got deferred payments on his 5-year, $75 million deal. The Dodgers, they're not doing anything against the rules here. They're just being smarter than everybody else. And all of these other teams, they got billionaires that run things that could be doing these same things. They're just not thinking outside the box, thinking as advanced as the Dodgers are doing here. Like in the case of, let's take, for example, the New York Mets. The New York Mets could re-sign Pete Alonso right now and do a potential deferred payment structure deal where he gets some money later on, or do a signing bonus where he gets most of it up front. They're electing not to do that. They're electing to look on to possibly the future of signing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. when he's a free agent coming up next offseason. Hell, they could do that same thing with Vlad Guerrero when he's a free agent next year. Offer him $400 million and do some kind of deferred payment deal. They could have done that with Juan Soto, where you're not paying him $55 million per year. You defer some of the contract, maybe only pay him $40 per year, and he gets $15 million per season when his career is all said and done. He's getting paid till he's 65 years old, just like Bobby Bonilla is doing. So rather than throw your arms up, cry, whine, and complain, and say, oh, I'm not going to watch baseball anymore, when you know damn well you're either going to be in the ballpark or sitting there on your couch in front of the TV set on March 22nd watching baseball with all of the rest of us, why don't you scream and cry to your own ownership and ask the question, why are they not being as smart as the Los Angeles Dodgers? And that, my friends, was Keeping It Sports with M3 for Tuesday, January 21st, 2025. Everyone, please have a great night. Have a fun, safe, happy, healthy week. You get one life, people, so you might as well try to live it up. And I'll talk to you guys again, same time, next week. Until then, peace.
We have to go. Good night, everybody.
I have had enough of you!
Thank you for all the fun. Thank you. Hey, shut up, will ya?
I don't want to see you, I don't want to hear you, I don't want to smell you. Now leave. I'll be back.